Chapter 3. A Clash of Civilizations. It has belatedly begun to dawn on people that the industrial civilization we knew is coming to an end. Its unraveling, already evident when we wrote about it in the General Crisis of Industrialism and Future Shock 1970, brings with it a threat of more, not fewer wars, wars of a new type. Today, many use the term postmodern to describe whatever it is that comes after modernity. But when we spoke about this with Don Morelli and Don Starry in the early 1980s, we referred instead to the differences between the first wave, or agrarian, second wave, or industrial, and now third wave armies. Because massive changes in society cannot occur without conflict, we believe the metaphor of history as waves of change is more dynamic when revealing than talk about transition to postmodernism. Waves are dynamic. When waves crash in on one another, powerful cross currents are unleashed. When waves of history collide, whole civilizations clash, and that sheds light on much that otherwise seems senseless or random in today's world. In fact, once we grasp the wave theory of conflict, it becomes apparent that the biggest shift of power now beginning on this planet is not between east or west or north or south, nor is it between different religious or ethnic groups. The deepest economic and strategic change of all is the coming division of the world into three distinct, differing, and potentially clashing civilizations. First wave civilization, as we've seen it, was inescapably attached to land, whatever local form it may have taken, whatever language its people spoke, whatever its religion or belief system, it was a product of agricultural revolution. Even today, multitudes live and die in pre-modern agrarian societies, scrabbling at the unyielding soil as their ancestors did centuries ago. Second wave civilization's origins are in dispute. Some historians trace its roots to the Renaissance or even earlier, but life did not fundamentally change for large numbers of people until, roughly speaking, 300 years ago. That was when Newtonian science first arose. It is when the steam engine was put to economic use and the first factories began to proliferate in Britain, France, and Italy. Peasants began moving into the cities, daring new ideas began to circulate. The idea of progress, the odd doctrine of individual rights, the Rousseauian notion of a social contract, secularism, the separation of church and state, and the novel idea that leaders should be chosen by popular will, not divine right. Driving many of these changes was a new way of creating wealth, factory production. And before long, many different elements came together to form a system. Mass production, mass consumption, mass education, mass media, all linked together by specialized institutions, schools, corporations, and political parties. Even family structure changed from the large agrarian-style household in which several generations lived together to small, stripped-down nuclear family typical of industrial societies. To the people actually experiencing these many changes, life must have seemed chaotic. Yet the changes were, in fact, all closely interrelated. They were merely steps towards the full development of what we came to call modernity, mass industrial society. The civilization of the second wave. This new civilization entered history with a roar in Western Europe, fiercely resisting at every step. The master conflict. In every industrializing country, bitter, often bloodthirsty battles broke out between second wave industrial and commercial groups and first wave landowners in alliance, very often with the church itself a great landowner. Masses of peasants were forced off the land to provide workers for the new satanic mills and factories that multiplied over the landscape. Strikes and rebellions, civil insurrections, border disputes, nationalist uprisings erupted as the war between the first and second wave interests became the master conflict. The central tension from which other conflicts derived, this pattern was repeated in almost every industrializing country. In the United States, it required a terrible civil war for the industrial commercial interests of the North to vanquish the agrarian elites of the South. Only a few years later, the Meiji revolutions broke out in Japan, and once more second-wave modernizers triumphed over the first-wave traditionalists. The spread of second-wave civilization with its strange new way of making wealth destabilized relationships between countries as well, creating power vacuums and power shifts. Industrialization led to the expansion of national markets and accompanying ideology of nationalism. Wars of unification swept Germany, Italy, and other countries. Uneven rates of development, competition for markets, the application of industrial techniques to arms production, all distributed prior power balances and continued. The wars that tore Europe and its neighbors apart in the mid and late 19th century. In fact, the center of gravity of world power system began to migrate towards industrializing Europe and away from the Ottoman Empire and the Tsar's feudal Russia. Modern civilization, the product of the great second wave of change, took root most rapidly on the northern shores of the great Atlantic basin. As the Atlantic powers industrialized, they needed markets and cheap raw materials from distant regions. The advanced second wave powers thus waged war on colonial conquest and came to dominate the remaining first wave states and tribal units of Asia and Africa. Thus, just as industrializing elites ultimately won the struggle for power inside their own countries, they also won the later struggle for world power. A bisected world. It was the same master conflict again, second wave industrial powers versus first wave agrarian powers, but this time on a global rather than domestic scale. And it was this struggle that basically determined the shape of the world until recent times. It set the frame within which most wars took place. Tribal and territorial wars between different primitive and agricultural groups continued, as they had throughout the previous millennia. But these were of limited importance, and often merely weakened both sides, making them easy prey for the colonizing forces of industrial civilization. This happened, for example, in southern Africa, as Cecil Rhodes and his armed agents seized vast territories from tribal and agrarian groups busy fighting one another with primitive weapons. Elsewhere, too, many seemingly unconnected wars around the world were, in fact, expressions of the main global conflict, not between competing states, but competing civilizations. Yet the very biggest and most murderous wars during the Industrial Age were intra-industrial. Wars that pitted second-wave nations like Germany and Britain against one another, as each one struggled for global dominance while keeping the world's first-wave populations in their subordinate place. The ultimate result was a clear division. The industrial era bisected the world into the dominating second-wave civilization, and scores of silent but subordinate first-wave colonies. Most of us grew up in this world, divided between first and second-wave civilizations, and it was perfectly clear which one held power. A trisected world. Today, the lineup of world civilizations is different. We are speeding towards a totally different structure of power that will create not a world cut in two, but sharply divided into three contrasting and competing civilizations. The first still symbolized by the hoe, the second by the assembly line, and the third by the computer. That term, civilization, may sound pretentious, especially to American ears. But no other term is sufficiently all-embracing to include such varied matters as technology, family life, religion, culture, politics, business, hierarchy, leadership, values, sexual morality, and epistemology. Swift and radical changes are occurring in every one of these dimensions of society. As a new civilization arrives, it touches the fundamental and the trivial alike. Thus today we see an enormous number of things that we thought were inconceivable, unavailable, or socially disapproved of in the past. Everything from heart transplants to frisbees and yogurt franchises, from condos and consultants to contact lenses, from spacewalks to Game Boy cartridges, from Jews for Jesus to New Age worship, from laser surgeons to CNN, from ecological fundamentalism to chaos theory. Change all these social, technological, and cultural elements at once, and you create not just a transition, but a transformation. Not just a society, but the beginnings, at least, of a totally new civilization. But to introduce a new civilization onto the planet and then expect peace and tranquility is the height of strategic naivety. Each civilization has its own economic and hence political and military requirements. In the trisected world, the first wave sector supplies agricultural and mineral resources. The second wave sector provides cheap labor and does the mass production. And the rapidly expanding third wave sector rises to dominance based on the new ways in which it creates and exploits knowledge. Third wave nations sell information and innovation, management, culture, and pop culture, advanced technology, software, education, training, medical care, and financial and other services to the world. One of those services might well also turn out to be military protection based on its command of superior third wave forces. That is, in effect, what the high-tech nations provide for Kuwait and Saudi Arabia in the Gulf War. Decoupling the poor. In third wave, brain-based economies, mass production, which could also be considered the defining mark of the industrial society, is already an outmoded form. Demassified production, short runs of highly customized products, is the cutting edge of manufacture. Services proliferate. Intangible assets like information become the key resource. Uneducated and unskilled workers are made jobless. Old industrial-style behemoths collapse of their own weight. The GMs and Bethlehem Steels that dominated the age of mass production face destruction. Labor unions and the mass manufacturing sector shrink. The media are demassified in parallel with production, and giant TV networks shrivel as new channels proliferate. The family system, too, becomes demassified. The nuclear family, once the modern standard, becomes a minority form, while single-parent households, remarried couples, childless families, and live-alones proliferate. Culture shifts from one in which standards are clearly defined and hierarchical to ones in which ideas, images, and symbols swirl in a maelstrom, and the individual plucks individual elements with which to form his or her own mosaic or collage. Existing values are challenged or ignored. The entire structure of society therefore changes. The homogeneity of second-wave society is replaced by the heterogeneity of the third-wave civilization. In turn, the very complexity of the new system requires more and more information exchange among its units: companies, government agencies, hospitals, associations, other institutions, and individual people. This creates a ravenous need for computers, digital telecommunications, networks, and new media. Simultaneously, the pace of technological change, transactions, and daily life speeds up. In fact, third-wave economies operate at speeds so accelerated that their pre-modern suppliers can barely keep pace. Moreover, as the information increases, substitutes for bulk, raw materials, labor, and other resources, third-wave countries become less dependent on first-wave or second-wave partners, except for markets. More and more, they do business with each other. Eventually, their highly capitalized knowledge-based technology will take over many tasks now done by cheap labor countries and actually do them faster, better, and more cheaply. Put differently, these changes threaten to slash many of the existing economic links between the rich economies and the poor. Complete decoupling is impossible, however, since it is not possible to stop pollution, disease, and immigration from penetrating the borders of third-wave countries. Nor can the rich nations survive if the poor wage ecological war on them by manipulating their environments in ways that damage everyone. For these reasons, tensions between the third wave civilization and the two older forms of civilization will continue to rise, and the new civilization will fight to establish global hegemony, just as second-wave modernizers did with respect to the first-wave pre-modern societies in centuries past. The duck soup phenomenon. Once the concept of a clash of civilizations is grasped, it helps us make sense of many seemingly odd phenomena. Today's flaring nationalisms, for example. Nationalism is the ideology of the nation-state, which is a product of the Industrial Revolution. Thus, as first-wave or agrarian societies seek to start or complete their industrialization, they demand the trappings of nationhood. Former Soviet republics like Ukraine and Estonia or Georgia fiercely insist on self-determination. and demand yesterday's marks of modernity, the flags, armies, and currencies that defined the nation-state during the second wave or industrial era. It is hard for many in the high-tech world to comprehend the motivations of ultranationalists. Their puffed-up patriotism strikes many as amusing. It calls to mind the Land of Fredonia and the Marx Brothers movie Duck Soup, which satirized the notion of national superiority as two fictional nations went to war against one another. By contrast, it is incomprehensible to nationalists that some countries allow others to invade their supposedly sacred independence. Yet the globalization of business and finance required by the advancing third-wave economies punctures the national sovereignty the new nationalists hold so dear. Poets of globalism. As economies are transferred by the third wave, they are compelled to surrender part of their sovereignty and to accept the increasing economic and cultural intrusions from one another. The United States insists that Japan restructure its retail distribution system, thus threatening to wipe out an entire social class of small shopkeepers along with the culture and family structure they represent. In return, Japan insists that the United States put more money into savings, think long range, and restructure its education system. Such demands would have been deemed unacceptable invasions of sovereignty in the past. Thus, while the poets and intellectuals of economically backward regions write national anthems, the poets and intellectuals of third-wave states sing the virtues of borderless world. The resulting collisions, reflecting the sharply differing needs of two radically different civilizations, could provoke some of the world's worst bloodshed in years to come. If today's redivision of the world from 2 into 3 parts seems less than obvious right now, it is simply because transition from the second wave brute force economies to the third wave brain force economies is nowhere yet complete. Even in the United States, Japan, and Europe, the domestic battle for control between third wave and second wave elites is still not over. Important second-wave institutions and sectors of production still remain, and second-wave political lobbies still cling to power. A perfect measure of this was provided in the United States during the fading days of the Bush administration when the Congress passed an infrastructure bill providing $150 billion to refurbish the old second-wave infrastructure of roads, highways, and bridges, but only $1 billion to help build an electric supercomputer network for the country, part of the infrastructure of the third wave. Despite its support for high-speed network, the Clinton administration changed the ratio hardly at all. The mix of second and third wave elements in each high-tech country gives each its own characteristic formation. Nevertheless, the trajectories are clear. Competitive race will be won by the countries that complete their third wave transformation with the least amount of domestic dislocation and unrest. In the meantime, the historic change from a bisected to trisected world could well trigger the deepest power struggles on the planet as each country tries to position itself in the emerging three-tiered power structure. Trisection sets the context in which most wars from now on will be fought, and those wars will be different from those most of us imagine.